"Don't call him that," Adrian Blackwell said, but the little boy had already crossed the marble floor and wrapped both arms around my waist like he had been waiting for me his entire life. The word he whispered was so small, so broken, and yet it struck the grand entrance hall harder than thunder. "Mommy." Every servant froze. The attorney beside me stopped breathing. Even the chandelier above us seemed to hold still, its crystal light trembling over the white marble like ice about to crack. I stood there with my old canvas duffel bag slipping from my shoulder, my wrist still sore from where my stepfather had dragged me out of our apartment less than an hour earlier, and I had no idea what to do with the child clinging to me as if I were the only warm thing left in the world. I was Noah Bennett, 22 years old, an omega with no money, no family willing to claim me, and no choice left that belonged to me. By morning, I had been a person. By noon, I had become a payment. The Blackwell lawyers had called it a private guardianship arrangement. My stepfather had called it a blessing. My mother had not called it anything at all. She had simply looked away while he signed my name beside a number large enough to erase every debt he had ever created. And now I stood inside the Blackwell estate, a mansion of glass, steel, and polished stone perched above the cliffs outside Seattle, staring down at a 5-year-old boy with dark hair, pale cheeks, and blue eyes too sad for a child. His small fingers curled into the front of my sweater. "Ethan," Adrian said, his voice low and controlled, the kind of voice that made other people obey before they understood why. "Step away from him." The boy shook his head and pressed his face harder against me. I felt the faint tremble in his little shoulders, and instinct moved before fear could stop it. I lowered one hand and touched his hair as gently as I could. The room changed. It was subtle, but I felt it. The servant stared. The attorney's pen clicked once in his nervous hand. Adrian Blackwell's icy blue eyes sharpened on me as if I had crossed a line drawn in invisible ink. He was taller than I expected, dressed in a black suit that looked less like clothing and more like armor. Everything about him was precise, expensive, and cold, from the silver watch at his wrist to the severe line of his mouth. This was the alpha CEO people whispered about in business articles and courthouse hallways, the man who bought failing companies before breakfast and dismantled rivals by dinner. My stepfather had smiled when he told me I was lucky. Lucky to be chosen. Lucky a man like Adrian Blackwell had any use for me. But standing in front of him, I did not feel chosen. I felt delivered. "Mr. Blackwell," the attorney said carefully, "perhaps the child's reaction is a positive sign." The agreement did specify emotional compatibility as a priority. Adrian did not look at him. He looked only at the boy holding me and then at my hand still resting in Ethan's hair. "He is not here to replace anyone," Adrian said. The words were calm, but there was something wounded beneath them, something locked behind years of discipline. "And he is not your mother." Ethan's grip tightened. I should have stepped back. I should have apologized, lowered my eyes, remembered that I had been brought here under contract and that contracts did not have feelings. But Ethan made a tiny sound against my sweater, not quite a sob, not quite a breath, and my chest ached in a place I thought my family had already emptied. "It's okay," I whispered before I could stop myself. "I'm not going anywhere right now." Adrian's gaze flashed. "You don't make promises in this house." I lifted my eyes to his for the first time, terrified and tired and still holding the child who had chosen me before anyone had explained why. Then maybe someone should start. The silence after that was so deep I could hear the rain beginning against the windows, soft and steady, like the whole gray sky had leaned close to listen. Adrian Blackwell took one step toward me, and every instinct in my body told me to shrink away from the powerful alpha who now owned the roof over my head, the food I would eat, and the future I no longer recognized. But Ethan would not let go. And for reasons I could not explain, neither did I. The rain had grown heavier by the time Adrian ordered the attorney to take the signed papers to his study, and I was left standing in the entrance hall with Ethan still clinging to me and the terrible feeling that my life had been sealed inside an envelope I had never been allowed to open. No one explained the house rules to me at first. They only watched. A woman in a gray uniform took my duffel bag as if it might stain the floor, and an older man with silver hair introduced himself as Mr. Collins, the household manager, in a voice so polished it almost sounded kind. "Your room is in the East Wing, Mr. Bennett. Meals are taken separately unless Mr. Blackwell requests otherwise. You are not to enter the West Corridor, the executive office, or the child's private therapy room without permission." The child. Not Ethan. Not his son. Just the child, as if even his name had become something the adults in this house were afraid to touch. Ethan finally pulled back enough to look up at me, his blue eyes red around the edges, and my heart tightened. He had one hand fisted in my sweater and the other wrapped around the ear of a worn stuffed rabbit whose stitching had come loose at the side. "Are you hungry?" I asked softly. The question slipped out before I remembered I had no authority here, no right to offer comfort inside a mansion that did not belong to me. Ethan nodded once. Mr. Collins looked uncertainly toward Adrian, who stood at the base of the staircase like a shadow cut from black glass. For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. Then he turned away. "Let him eat." Those 3 words moved the whole house. Within minutes, I was guided into a breakfast room larger than the entire apartment I had left behind, with a table long enough for 20 people and only one small place setting at the end. Ethan climbed into the chair beside mine instead of the one prepared for him. A maid set down a plate with grilled chicken, steamed carrots, and a bowl of soup, all arranged with the careful perfection of a restaurant, but Ethan only stared at it. "He has refused most meals for weeks," Mr. Collins murmured. "The doctors believe it is grief-related." I glanced toward the doorway, where Adrian had stopped. But not entered. He was listening. I could feel his attention like cold pressure across my back. I picked up the spoon and tasted the soup first, making myself smile even though my stomach was twisted into knots. "It is pretty good," I said to Ethan. "A little fancy for soup, but not bad." Ethan watched me with serious suspicion, then opened his mouth for one small bite. The room went still again. It was such a small thing, barely a spoonful, but the maid pressed a hand to her mouth, and Mr. Collins looked down as if he needed a moment to hide his face. Ethan took another bite. Then another. I did not praise him too loudly. Something told me this child lived around adults who turned every fragile step into a medical report. So I only said, "Nice job," and reached for a napkin when a little soup touched his chin. From the doorway, Adrian's voice came low and sharp. "Do not encourage dependency." My hand paused. Ethan's shoulders curled inward at the sound. I set the napkin down slowly and looked at the alpha who had brought me here like a transaction but seemed almost afraid of what kindness might cost. "He is 5, I said. Needing someone is not a failure at 5. Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his eyes did. A flicker. A crack too small for anyone else to notice. "You know nothing about my son." I looked back at Ethan, at the way he was trying to hold the spoon by himself even though his fingers trembled. "No," I said quietly. "But I know what it feels like to eat at a table where nobody wants to look at you." The words settled between us before I could take them back. For the first time, Adrian Blackwell looked at me not like a purchase, not like a problem, but like a person who had brought an unexpected mirror into his perfect, frozen house. That night, they showed me to a small bedroom in the east wing with cream walls, a narrow bed, and windows facing the dark line of the trees beyond the driveway. I sat on the edge of the mattress, still wearing the sweater Ethan had wrinkled with his little hands, and tried not to think about the apartment I would never return to. Just after midnight, I heard a soft sound outside my door. When I opened it, Ethan stood barefoot in the hallway, holding his rabbit against his chest. "I had the bad dream again," he whispered. I looked past him into the silent corridor, waiting for a servant, a nanny, his father, anyone with permission to handle this. No one came. Ethan lifted the rabbit toward me. "Can Mr. Bunn sleep here too?" I should have said no. I should have remembered Adrian's warning. Instead, I opened the door wider, and Ethan stepped into my room like he had finally found one place in that enormous mansion where the air was warm enough to breathe. By morning, the secret was no longer a secret. I woke with one arm numb beneath the weight of a sleeping child and a stuffed rabbit pressed against my cheek. Ethan had curled himself against my side sometime before dawn, his small hand gripping the sleeve of my sweater as if even sleep could not convince him I would stay. For a few quiet seconds, I forgot where I was. The rain had stopped, and pale Seattle light slipped through the curtains, turning the unfamiliar room silver. Then the door opened without a knock. Adrian Blackwell stood in the doorway, dressed in another dark suit, his expression unreadable and his eyes fixed on his son. The air shifted so quickly I stopped breathing. Ethan stirred, blinked, and immediately tightened his hold on me. "I had a bad dream," he whispered, as if that explained everything. Adrian's jaw flexed. "You have a room, Ethan." The little boy looked down at the rabbit between us. This room was warmer. The answer was so simple, so devastating, that no one moved. Adrian's gaze lifted to mine, and I saw the accusation there before he spoke. "I told you not to make promises." I sat up carefully, easing Ethan's head onto the pillow. "I did not promise anything." I opened a door. "In this house, that is the same thing." His voice was controlled, but not loud. Somehow that made it worse. I had known men who shouted because they wanted to scare people. Adrian did not need to shout. The house was built to carry his silence. Ethan slid off the bed and stood between us, clutching Mr. Bunn. "Do not send him away." Adrian looked down at his son, and for one brief moment, the cold CEO disappeared. What remained was a father who had no idea how to reach a child standing 3 feet away. Then the mask returned. "Breakfast is in 20 minutes. He turned and left, but not before I caught the way his fingers curled once at his side, as if he had wanted to do something and stopped himself. The rest of the day became a lesson in how loneliness could be hidden inside luxury. Mr. Collins gave me a tour of the East Wing, the kitchen, the garden room, the library with shelves no one seemed to touch, and the playroom that looked as if it had been designed by a committee of adults who had forgotten what children liked. Every toy was expensive. Every book was arranged by height. There were wooden trains without fingerprints, plush animals without bent ears, art supplies still sealed in plastic. Ethan stood beside me silently until I picked up a box of crayons and asked, "Which color is the fastest?" He looked at me like no one had ever asked him such an important question. "Red," he said after careful thought. "But blue wins if it is raining." So we sat on the floor in the middle of the perfect playroom and drew racing cars with crooked wheels and clouds shaped like pancakes. I expected someone to correct us. No one did. By lunch, Ethan had eaten half a peanut butter sandwich cut into stars because I could not find a cookie cutter and used the edge of a small measuring cup instead. By afternoon, he had shown me the garden where his mother used to grow white roses. He did not say much about her. He only touched one sleeping bush and whispered, "Daddy does not come here." I looked back at the tall windows of the house and saw Adrian watching from the second floor. He did not step outside. He simply stood there, separated from us by glass, by grief, by whatever rule he had made that told him distance was safer than love. That evening, I found the tear in Mr. Bunn's side and asked Mr. Collins for a needle and thread. Ethan sat beside me on the rug while I stitched the little rabbit closed with clumsy care. "You fix things," he said. I smiled faintly. "Small things." He leaned against my shoulder. "Can you fix Daddy?" My hand stopped. Across the room, in the reflection of the dark window, I saw Adrian standing in the doorway. I did not know how long he had been there. His face was still, but his eyes were not. They held something raw and unguarded, gone almost as soon as I noticed it. I looked down at Ethan and finished the final stitch. "People are not toys, sweetheart," I said gently. "You cannot fix them unless they want to heal." Adrian said nothing. He only turned away, but that night, for the first time, he did not close the door to the west corridor all the way. By the fourth day, the mansion had begun to betray itself. It was still beautiful in the way expensive places were beautiful, all clean lines, polished stone, and windows tall enough to make a person feel small, but the silence no longer felt perfect. It felt practiced. It felt like everyone inside had learned to move quietly around a wound they were not allowed to name. Ethan followed me everywhere now, padding after me in little socks through hallways that smelled faintly of lemon polish and winter rain. He did not talk constantly. He was not that kind of child. Instead, he offered small pieces of himself like treasures he was afraid I might refuse. He showed me the kitchen drawer where the cook hid chocolate chips. He showed me the loose floorboard in the library where he kept 3 blue crayons and a penny from the year he was born. He showed me a photograph tucked inside Mr. Bunn's ribbon, folded so many times the edges had gone soft. In it, Adrian stood beside a woman with pale blonde hair in the rose garden, holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket. Adrian was younger in the picture, but that was not what struck me. He was smiling. Not politely. Not for a camera. Truly smiling, like the world had once given him something he did not know how to hold without wonder. That was Mommy Claire, Ethan said, touching the photograph with one careful finger. She smelled like flowers. I swallowed gently. She was beautiful. Ethan nodded. Daddy put all her pictures away because they made his eyes hurt. I did not know what to say to that, so I only folded the picture carefully and gave it back. That afternoon, Ethan asked if we could make cookies. The request startled the staff more than it should have. The cook, Mrs. Alvarez, looked at Mr. Collins as if a child asking for chocolate chip cookies required approval from the federal government. I almost laughed, then realized no one else was going to. We can keep it simple, I said. Flour, sugar, butter, chocolate chips. Nothing dangerous. Mrs. Alvarez gave me a measuring cup with the solemn expression of someone handing over state secrets. Ethan stood on a step stool beside me, dusting more flour onto the counter than into the bowl. For the first time since I arrived, the kitchen sounded alive. There was the soft thud of dough, Ethan's quiet giggle when flour landed on my nose, Mrs. Alvarez pretending not to smile, and the oven warming the air until the whole room smelled like vanilla and melted chocolate. I did not notice Adrian until the laughter stopped. He stood at the kitchen entrance, his dark coat still on, his briefcase in one hand, his expression unreadable. Ethan froze with both hands in the mixing bowl. I asked, he said quickly, even though no one had accused him. Noah said I could help. Adrian's eyes moved from the flour on the counter to the streak of sugar on Ethan's cheek, then to me. I expected a reprimand about mess, sugar, schedules, dependency, all the rules this house seemed built upon. Instead, his gaze lingered on his son's face with a stunned stillness that made my chest ache. Ethan was smiling. Adrian looked at that smile like a man seeing sunlight after years underground. Wash your hands before you touch anything else, he said at last. It was not warm, exactly, but it was not cold either. Ethan grinned and hopped down from the stool. Can Daddy have one? The question opened something fragile in the room. Adrian looked as if he had been asked to step across a bridge he did not trust. I do not eat sweets. Ethan's smile faltered. I picked up a warm cookie from the cooling rack, wrapped it in a napkin, and held it out. Then just hold it for him. Adrian stared at me for one long second. I had spoken too casually, too boldly. But I did not take it back. Slowly, he accepted the cookie. Ethan watched him as if the fate of the world rested on that small circle of chocolate and butter. Adrian broke off a corner and tasted it. His face did not change, but Ethan's did. Joy brightened him from the inside out. He likes it, Ethan whispered. I did not say that, Adrian replied. But he did not put the cookie down. That night, when I passed the west corridor on my way back from getting Ethan a glass of water, I saw Adrian alone in the rose garden through the tall window. He stood in the rain without an umbrella, the cookie napkin still folded in his hand, looking at the empty bushes as if they might answer him. For the first time, I understood that his cruelty was not a wall built from hatred. It was a locked door made from grief. And somehow, without meaning to, Ethan had placed my hand on the key. The next morning, Ethan asked for the rose garden before breakfast. He stood beside my bed in dinosaur pajamas, hair sticking up in soft black tufts, Mr. Bun tucked beneath one arm and his expression so serious I almost forgot he was 5. "Mommy Claire's flowers are sleeping," he told me. But maybe they forgot how to wake up. I did not correct the name he used for her. I had learned that grief in this house had its own language, and Ethan was the only one brave enough to speak it without shame. So I found his rain boots, wrapped him in a yellow jacket too bright for the Blackwell mansion, and took him outside while the morning mist still clung to the lawn. The garden was not dead, exactly, but it had been neglected. The white rose bushes were tangled and bare, the soil hardened from weeks of cold weather, the stone bench streaked with rain. Ethan knelt beside the first bush and patted the dirt with both hands. "She liked this one," he whispered. "Daddy said it bloomed the day I came home." I knelt beside him and brushed damp soil from his sleeve. "Then we should take care of it." We spent nearly an hour clearing leaves, loosening dirt, and finding the small copper markers half buried near each plant. Claire Blackwell had labeled every rose by hand. Snow Pearl. White Dawn. First Light. The names made my throat tighten. She had left pieces of love everywhere, and Adrian had locked them outside in the rain because looking at them hurt too much. When we returned to the kitchen, our shoes muddy and Ethan's cheeks pink from the cold, Adrian was waiting near the island with a cup of black coffee in his hand. His eyes dropped to the dirt on Ethan's jacket. "Where were you?" Ethan answered before I could. "We helped Mommy Claire's roses." The silence that followed was sharp enough to make Mrs. Alvarez turn away from the stove. Adrian set his coffee down very slowly. "That garden is not a play area." Ethan's smile faded. I felt him move closer to my side. Something protective rose in me, quiet but firm. "He was not playing," I said. "He was remembering." Adrian's eyes cut to mine. "You do not get to decide how this family remembers." "No," I said, my voice softer than his but steady. "But neither do you get to decide that forgetting is safer." For a second, I thought I had gone too far. Maybe I had. The old Noah, the one who had learned to lower his eyes around angry adults and swallow every word that might make life harder, would have apologized. But the old Noah had not spent the morning watching a little boy try to wake up flowers because he missed his mother. Adrian turned away first. "Get him cleaned up." He left without another word. Ethan looked up at me, worried. "Is Daddy mad?" I wiped a bit of soil from his cheek with my thumb. "I think Daddy is sad." Ethan considered that with the grave wisdom only children seem to have. "Sad looks like mad on him." That afternoon, Adrian's private therapist arrived for Ethan's weekly session, a calm beta woman named Dr. Lillian Reeves with silver glasses and a canvas bag full of picture cards. Ethan refused to enter the therapy room unless I sat outside the door. I expected Adrian to object, but he only stood at the far end of the hall, arms crossed, watching as his son placed Mr. Bun in my lap for safekeeping. The session lasted 40 minutes. I did not hear every word, only fragments through the heavy door. Garden. Cookie. Noah. Mommy. Safe. When Dr. Reeves came out, her expression was careful. She asked to speak with Adrian and me together. We gathered in the library, where the untouched books rose around us like witnesses. Dr. Reeves folded her hands. "Ethan is not confusing Noah with Claire," she said gently. Adrian went completely still. "Then why is he using that word?" "Because to him, the word does not only mean the mother he lost. It means warmth, safety, softness, the person who comes when he cries and stays when he reaches out." Children often attach language to feelings before they understand adult boundaries. Adrian looked toward the windows, his face closed, but his scent shifted, cold cedar touched by something strained and bitter. So this is dependency. Dr. Reeves shook her head. No. This is recovery. The word seemed to land in the room like a match struck in darkness. Recovery. Not replacement. Not betrayal. Not weakness. I looked at Adrian and saw him absorb it with visible difficulty, as if someone had told him the thing he feared most might actually be saving his son. Later that evening, I found him in the garden again, standing before the rosebush named First Light. This time, he held a pair of pruning gloves. He did not look at me when I stepped onto the path. I do not know where to cut, he admitted, the words rough and low. I walked closer, leaving a careful distance between us. Neither did I. He glanced at me then, and for the first time, there was no command in his eyes. Only exhaustion. Only a father who had been trying to protect a memory so tightly that he had almost buried his living child beside it. I reached toward the rosebush, pointing to a dry branch. Start with what cannot bloom anymore. Adrian looked at the branch, then at me, and slowly lifted the shears. For 3 days after Adrian touched the roses, the mansion changed in ways so small that anyone else might have missed them. The west corridor stayed open. Ethan's drawings were no longer returned to a folder after therapy but taped carefully to the refrigerator, one crooked blue race car at a time. At dinner, Adrian sat at the same table for 12 whole minutes, not speaking much, not smiling, but present, and Ethan looked at him as if those 12 minutes were a miracle worth memorizing. I tried not to let myself feel proud. Pride was dangerous for someone like me. It made a person believe they belonged somewhere before the world reminded them they were only being allowed to stand there temporarily. Still, on the third evening, when Adrian found me in the garden helping Ethan water the rose bushes with a green plastic watering can, he did not tell us to stop. He simply removed his suit jacket, rolled his sleeves to his forearms, and took the heavier can from the stone path. Ethan stared. I stared too. Adrian Blackwell, billionaire Alpha CEO, stood in the damp grass beside us and watered a rose called White Dawn with the concentration of a man negotiating a billion-dollar merger. Ethan's smile came slowly, then all at once. Daddy, you are doing it wrong, he said, pointing with great authority. Adrian looked down at the puddle forming near his polished shoes. Plants are more complicated than they appear. I laughed before I could stop myself. The sound startled all three of us. Adrian looked at me, and for one brief second, the coldness around him thinned. Not disappeared. Not yet. But thinned enough that I saw the man from the photograph, the one who had once known how to smile without pain attached to it. That was the moment my phone rang. The sound cut through the garden like a warning. I knew the number before I looked. My stepfather. My hand went cold around the phone. I ignored it. It rang again. Then a message appeared. Pick up, or your rich alpha finds out what kind of omega you really are. I must have gone pale, because Adrian's attention sharpened immediately. Who is it? No one, I said too quickly. Ethan tugged on my sleeve. Are you sick? I forced a smile for him. No, sweetheart. Just tired. But the phone kept buzzing in my pocket like a trapped insect. That night, after Ethan fell asleep with Mr. Bun under his chin, I stepped into the hallway and listened to the voicemail with shaking fingers. My stepfather's voice poured into my ear, oily and familiar. He said the money had not been enough. He said Adrian Blackwell could afford more. He said if I did not help him, he would go to the press and tell them I had planned the whole arrangement, that I had targeted a grieving alpha and his vulnerable child, that I was using Ethan to climb into the Blackwell fortune. I leaned against the wall, my chest tight with the old helplessness I hated. I had been sold once. Now they wanted to sell the story of me too. The next morning, the first article appeared online. It was not from a major newspaper, just a glossy gossip site with too many advertisements and a headline cruel enough to do its job. By breakfast, 3 more had copied it. By 10 o'clock, Adrian's legal team was in the library. By noon, the board of Blackwell Industries demanded a private call. I stood outside the library doors and heard pieces of my own life turned into corporate risk. Unregistered background. Family debt. Emotional manipulation. Child exposure. Temporary removal recommended. Ethan sat on the stairs in his pajamas, holding Mr. Bunn so tightly the repaired seam stretched under his fingers. "Why are they talking about you?" he whispered. I sat beside him and took a breath that felt too small. Sometimes grown-ups say things before they know what is true. The library doors opened. Adrian stepped out, his face carved into the same expression he wore the day I arrived. The door inside him had closed again. Behind him stood a woman in a navy suit I recognized from the contract signing. "Noah," Adrian said, and the sound of my name in his voice hurt more than anger would have. "You should pack your things for a few days." Ethan made a sound like the floor had vanished beneath him. "No," Adrian's eyes flicked to his son, and pain crossed his face so quickly it could have been mistaken for shadow. "This is temporary." I stood slowly. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to tell him I had ignored the calls, that I had not asked for any of this, that I had been afraid. But the old training rose faster than my courage. Do not make it worse. Do not beg where you are not wanted. Do not cry in front of people who already decided your worth. So I nodded. Ethan threw himself against my legs. "You promised right now," he sobbed. "You said you were not going anywhere right now." My hand trembled as I touched his hair. Adrian looked away. That was the moment I understood the deepest cruelty of fear. It could make a man protect his house by breaking the only heart inside it that still knew how to hope. The car that took me away from the Blackwell estate smelled like leather, rain, and the kind of silence people use when they are paid not to notice suffering. I sat in the back seat with my duffel bag on my lap, the same old canvas bag I had carried in on my first day, only now it felt heavier than before. Mr. Collins had offered to arrange a hotel, but I could not bear the thought of sleeping under another roof paid for by Adrian Blackwell while his son cried behind locked doors. So I gave the driver the address of the apartment I had once called home, knowing even before we arrived that there would be no welcome waiting there. The building looked smaller in the gray afternoon, its brick walls dark with rain, the front steps littered with wet leaves and old mail. My key still worked. That was the first surprise. The second was that the apartment was nearly empty. My stepfather had taken the television, the microwave, the good blankets, even the framed picture my mother used to keep near the window. There was a note on the counter in his rough handwriting, saying they had gone to Portland for a while and that I should not act dramatic because I had landed on my feet better than any of them. I read it once, then folded it carefully because anger required energy I did not have. By evening, my phone had 37 missed calls from reporters, 3 messages from unknown numbers offering money for my side of the story, and 1 voicemail from Ethan that lasted only 6 seconds. There was no voice at first, just breathing, then one broken whisper. "Please come back." I pressed the phone to my chest and sank onto the kitchen floor. I did not cry loudly. I had learned early that loud sadness invited the wrong kind of attention. But I cried until the room blurred, until the cold linoleum beneath me felt more real than the last week of my life. Back at the mansion, Ethan stopped eating before dinner. Adrian told himself it was temporary. Children protested change. Children adapted. He repeated those words because experts had said them to him before, because board members had said them with polished concern, because fear sounded more reasonable when dressed as strategy. But Ethan did not adapt. He sat at the long dining table with Mr. Bunn in his lap and stared at the empty chair beside him. Mrs. Alvarez made soup. He turned away. Mr. Collins brought warm milk. He did not touch it. Adrian tried to sit across from him, then beside him, then closer, but Ethan only whispered, "You sent him away." The words landed softly. That made them worse. By midnight, Dr. Reeves was called. By morning, Ethan had a fever that rose and fell with his sobs. The doctor said his body was under emotional distress, that the shock had reopened the very wound they had been trying to heal. Adrian stood at the foot of his son's bed while Ethan slept restlessly, one small hand searching the empty space beside him. "He needs stability," Dr. Reeves said quietly. Adrian's voice was rough. "I was trying to give him that." She looked at him with a sadness that did not bend. "No, Mr. Blackwell. You were trying to control where pain could enter. That is not the same as stability." At noon, Mr. Collins entered the room holding a tablet. "Sir, you should see this." Security footage from the front gate showed Ethan at dawn, barefoot in his pajamas beneath a raincoat he had put on backward, slipping past the side entrance with Mr. Bunn under one arm. He had not made it beyond the garden path before a groundskeeper found him, but the image froze Adrian's blood. His 5-year-old son had tried to leave home because home had become the place Noah was missing from. Adrian watched the footage once. Then again. On the third time, he saw something that made his knees nearly give out. Ethan had paused beside the roses and whispered to the dark, as if making a promise to someone who was not there. Adrian could not hear the words, but he knew. He knew the shape of them. "Mommy said he would never leave me." The board could wait. The gossip sites could burn themselves out. The lawyers could argue with shadows until morning. Adrian took his coat from the chair and walked toward the door. Mr. Collins stepped aside without a word, but Dr. Reeves stopped him with one gentle sentence. "Do not bring Noah back as a solution to a crisis." Adrian looked at her, and for the first time in years, the answer came without calculation. "I am not." Outside, rain swept across the driveway in silver sheets. Adrian Blackwell stood beneath it for one breath, then another, feeling the cold soak through his suit. He thought of Ethan's empty chair, Claire's sleeping roses, a repaired stuffed rabbit, and an Omega who had opened a door when everyone else had built walls. Then he got into the car and gave the driver the address from the contract file, not to retrieve what he had paid for, but to ask forgiveness from the person he had failed to believe. The apartment had no heat when the rain turned cold. "I found an old sweatshirt in the bedroom closet and pulled it over my sweater, then wrapped myself in a thin blanket on the living room floor because the mattress was gone. The place felt less like home than a room someone had already erased me from. Every sound made me flinch. Pipes knocking in the wall. Tires hissing on the wet street below. My phone vibrating again and again until I finally turned it face down and let the battery die. I told myself this was better. Ethan would calm down. Adrian would find someone safer, someone polished, someone with no debt and no family waiting to turn pain into profit. The mansion would return to its perfect silence, and I would become a strange week in their lives, a mistake corrected before it became permanent. Then someone knocked on the door. Not the careless pounding of my stepfather. Not the eager rhythm of a reporter. 3 measured knocks, low and controlled, somehow familiar enough to make my heart ache before I even stood. I opened the door with the chain still on. Adrian Blackwell stood in the hallway, rain darkening his coat, his hair damp at the temples, his face stripped of every boardroom mask I had come to fear. He looked too large for the narrow corridor, too expensive for the peeling paint and flickering overhead light, but not untouchable. Not tonight. "Noah," he said. My name sounded different this time. Not an order. Not a verdict. A plea he did not yet know how to shape. I kept my hand on the door. Did something happen to Ethan? His eyes closed for half a second, and that was answer enough to frighten me. He is safe. Dr. Reeves is with him. But he tried to leave the house this morning. The chain rattled under my fingers. What? He was looking for you. My breath left me so quickly I had to hold the doorframe. Adrian's voice lowered. He made it to the garden path. A groundskeeper found him. He was cold, scared, and holding that rabbit you repaired. I covered my mouth, but the sound still escaped. I am sorry. Adrian looked at me as if the words hurt him. No. Do not apologize for what I did. For a long moment, the only thing between us was the chain on the door and all the things he had believed too late. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document, the contract with my signature at the bottom. I recognized the thick cream paper, the legal stamps, the shape of the cage I had been too tired to fight. Adrian held it with both hands. This brought you into my house, he said. It will not bring you back. Slowly, deliberately, he tore the contract down the middle. The sound was soft, almost ordinary, but it moved through me like thunder. He tore it again, and again, until the pieces lay in his palm like dead leaves. I should have listened when you were afraid, he said. I should have asked who was calling you. I should have believed the person who sat on the floor with my son when every paid expert in that house could not get him to eat soup. His voice roughened, but he did not look away. I have spent 2 years protecting Ethan from pain by removing anything I could not control. I did not understand that I was also removing warmth. My eyes burned. I wanted to be angry, and part of me was. Anger was easier than hope. The board will not want me there. The board does not raise my son. The press will keep talking. Then my lawyers can finally earn what I pay them. My family will ask for more money. They will get a restraining order and nothing else. I stared at him through the narrow opening. And what do you want, Adrian? That question seemed to stop him more than all the others. His gaze dropped once, then lifted again, clearer than I had ever seen it. I want Ethan to wake up and know the person who made him feel safe did not vanish because I was afraid. I want to learn how to sit at a dinner table without treating love like a threat. I want you to come back only if you choose to, and if you do not, I will still make sure you are protected from the people who hurt you. The hallway light flickered above us. For the first time in my life, someone powerful stood on the other side of a door and did not demand that I open it. He waited. The choice was mine, and that frightened me more than any contract ever had. I unhooked the chain. Adrian did not step forward. He let me open the door myself. I am not going back as something you bought, I said. Never again, he answered. And I am not replacing Claire. His face softened with a grief that no longer looked like ice. No. You are not replacing anyone. You are becoming someone Ethan chose, and someone I was too blind to see. I looked past him to the rain shining on the stairwell window, to the city beyond it, cold and gray and uncertain. Then I thought of a little boy in dinosaur pajamas, a garden of sleeping roses, and a stuffed rabbit with uneven stitches. I need to see him, I whispered. Adrian exhaled like he had been holding his breath since the mansion. The car is downstairs. I stepped into the hallway with nothing but my old duffel bag and a heart still shaking from the danger of being wanted without being owned. This time, when Adrian walked beside me, he did not lead like a man claiming property. He matched my pace like a man learning how to come home. The drive back to the Blackwell estate felt shorter than before, though every mile carried the weight of a choice I was still learning how to trust. Adrian sat beside me in silence, not the cold silence that had once filled his house, but a careful one, as if he understood that words could not repair everything just because he finally wanted them to. When the car turned through the iron gates, the mansion appeared beyond the rain-wet trees, its tall windows glowing gold against the gray evening. It did not look like a museum anymore. It looked like a place holding its breath. Before the car fully stopped, the front door opened. Mr. Collins stood there with an umbrella, and beside him was Dr. Reeves, but I saw only the small figure in dinosaur pajamas standing barefoot on the threshold, Mr. Bunn clutched to his chest. Ethan looked pale and tired, his hair messy from sleep, his eyes too wide with fear to believe what he was seeing. I stepped out of the car. For 1 second, he did not move. Then his face crumpled, and he ran. I dropped my duffel bag on the wet driveway and caught him just before he reached the steps. His arms locked around my neck with all the strength in his little body. "You came back," he sobbed. I held him so close I could feel his heartbeat racing against mine. "I came back. Daddy said you could choose." I looked over his shoulder at Adrian, who stood in the rain without moving closer, letting the moment belong to Ethan. "He was right," I whispered. "And I chose to see you." Ethan pulled back just enough to look at me with a seriousness that broke my heart all over again. "Can you choose tomorrow too?" My throat tightened. "Yes. Tomorrow too." That night, for the first time, dinner was served at the smaller table near the kitchen windows instead of the long formal dining room. Mrs. Alvarez made chicken noodle soup, grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles, and chocolate chip cookies that were slightly overbaked because Ethan insisted on helping. Adrian sat beside his son, not across from him like a judge, and when Ethan leaned against his arm, he did not stiffen or correct him. He rested one careful hand on the boy's shoulder and stayed there. After dinner, Adrian gathered the household staff in the library. I stood near the fireplace with Ethan's hand tucked into mine, expecting an announcement that sounded like business. Instead, Adrian placed the torn remains of the contract in a small brass bowl on the desk. "Noah Bennett is not an employee purchased by this family," he said, his voice steady enough to carry through every corner of the room. "He is here by choice. He will be treated with respect, privacy, and protection. Anyone who cannot accept that may leave with full severance tonight." No one moved. Mrs. Alvarez wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. Mr. Collins gave one dignified nod, but his face was softer than I had ever seen it. Then Adrian turned to me, and the room seemed to fall away. "I cannot undo how you came here," he said quietly. "But I can make sure every day after this proves that you are free to stay, free to speak, and free to leave without fear." Ethan squeezed my fingers. I did not answer with a speech. I simply nodded, because sometimes being believed is too large for words. In the weeks that followed, the gossip stories disappeared beneath legal notices, corrected statements, and the kind of silence money could finally use for something decent. My stepfather tried to call twice. The second time, a lawyer answered for me. After that, he stopped. The roses began to bloom in late spring. First light opened first, white petals touched with pale gold, and Ethan declared it a sign from Mommy Claire that the garden was awake again. Adrian did not hide the old photographs anymore. He placed one on the mantel in the family room, then another near the kitchen, and one in Ethan's bedroom where Claire smiled forever beneath a sky full of summer sun. Love did not erase her. It made room beside her. Adrian still stumbled. So did I. Some mornings he became too quiet, and some nights I still packed my feelings away before remembering I no longer had to survive by disappearing. But healing entered the house the way dawn enters a room, not all at once, but slowly, touching one dark corner after another until the shadows lost their power. Months later, on a clear Saturday morning, we planted a new rosebush together at the edge of the garden. Ethan dug with a plastic shovel. Adrian